Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner. Today we have another exciting guest, Gresham or Gresh Harkless Jr., who is the founder of CB Nation and Blue 16 Media. So I'm going to send you folks to his website so that you can get a little bit more of a rounded picture of Gresh, because he's obviously quite a rounded individual and is probably one of the media moguls you need to keep an eye out for. I'm not going to go through his entire biography. I'm sure it's been spoken about over and over. But CB Nation consists of ceoblognation.com, podcasts, so ceopodcast.com, and videos, which is cbnation.tv. And we're going to be talking a little bit about building a video or media or podcast empire. We're going to talk a little bit about some challenges in this very competitive space. And since Gresh is a proud graduate of Howard and Georgetown University, I'm going to talk about how many dollars he's got left on his student loan, because I'm sure, or maybe I shouldn't. But Gresh has also been recognized for in the Excellence Young Professionals program and the Alexandria, Virginia Chamber of Commerce is 40 under 40, a whole bunch of 40 under 40s here. So it opens up a whole new level of awards when you get past that 40 age group, Gresh. I'm sure you're looking forward to that. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Excited to be here. And I almost clicked off when you mentioned the part about the student loans. I was like, I'm in the wrong room. It was Sally Mae.
Well, okay, Sally Mae. I suppose, we always hear these horror stories about you poor American folks and your expensive education. And I'm in Norway, so education here theoretically is free and universities are free. But back in South Africa, where I grew up, you still have to pay for your universities, but not $100,000 a year or whatever crazy amounts you guys are paying for education. So,
yeah.
All right. So let's talk about it. CB Nation and Blue 16 Media. You've got quite a portfolio of businesses and brands behind you. Maybe give us an understanding of the structure of your businesses and what really pushed you to become an entrepreneur and not just go and work for a media outlet.
Yeah, it's so funny you said that. You're very kind in introducing me. I'm very much so a busybody. That's usually the way I best define it. I'm somebody that's interested in a lot of different things. And it's so funny that we were talking about, colleges and universities. I always said if there's one thing I might want to start, that it'd probably be instant profitability and probably be a university. So I don't know how that works out or if I can do that, but I'm sure that that's a good way to try to find something to do. But for me, I am that kid that, sold potato chips on the playground. I, got my parents to go to this place called MJ Designs. I don't know if they have that in Norway, but it's basically a place where you get a bunch of different arts and crafts type stuff. So I would get beads. I would have the string, the shoestring kind of necklace and put the beads on there. And I would sell those to people that were on the playground. And I did all those kind of different things, but I usually say the thing that was my quote unquote calling card of maybe coming of age is I started a family newspaper when I was 10. My dad was in the military. He went into an entirely different country. And at that time, we couldn't connect from DC to Norway instantly like we're doing now or anywhere around the world. We just had dial-up internet. So we used to send him emails, of course, all the time. We had the dial-up internet, the AOL, so we were able to do that. But we also put together these care packages where we would put all his favorite sweets, honey buns, oatmeal cream pies, or some of his favorites as well. But I also put what eventually became these family newspapers there. And I started to aggregate a lot of the things. And I'm using the word aggregate because, of course, I didn't use it then. But now I can say aggregate and collate all the information about things that were going on in our family. So I would also put things like sports, because I've always been fascinated in sports, things from history, just all these things to make it an official quote unquote newspaper. And then I sold those subscriptions to kind of family members. And a lot of times I bring that up because when I was looking back, when I was at Howard and coming in as an undecided major, when I was at Georgetown, figuring out, do I want to go to law school? Should I go to law school? All those questions, I went back to those stories, and I constantly go back to those stories because I felt like those were seeds planted in who I am what kind of makes me tick. And I felt like it also gave me a little bit more direction in terms of what decisions I need to make, what steps I need to do, and what kind of is my superpower. I like to even call on my podcast my secret sauce. So that's a lot of what kind of planted those seeds. And, fast forward a lot of years, lots of speed bumps, roadblocks, potholes, everything in between and all around. I've been able to build a digital marketing business. We do web design support and SEO services primarily. And then we have a slew of resources that you mentioned, CB Nation, which is kind of like an umbrella of our daily podcast, blog posts, video content, all to help CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business owners to succeed as much as possible.
So you talk about helping CEOs and entrepreneurs succeed as much as possible. I mean, everyone's trying to make a buck. Everyone wants to be the next Tesla. Everyone wants to be a successful business. Now, and I'm very sorry to mention it, but everyone mentions Elon Musk in every single conversation, but he's just ever present. I mean, he's just amazing. So we've got to touch on him. And in terms of the importance of obviously personal branding, so building your personal brand and managing that, not being too maverick, but being seen as somebody that people want to listen to, and then building your company brand. And it's quite a difficult tap dance to do in terms of your personal brand and your business, because how tightly enmeshed do you want to be? And sometimes if you do go off the rails, like some folks, it can impact on your business. Do you give guidance to companies in terms of this kind of dichotomy between personal brand and business brand? And maybe what suggestions have you heard or do you suggest to folks in terms of, or leaders in terms of managing that dance?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time because I think when I started the podcast, it was called the I Am CEO podcast. And even before we were doing the blog and all of that content, just kind of seeing the way that things have transitioned and changed from, I think, the way that we take in content, but also as consumers, like what we're looking for. So I love that you said tap dance. A lot of times I'll say, being on the balance beam between deciding whether or not I want to be fully the face of the brand and be a quote unquote influencer, content creator, whatever those, terms might be, or understanding that we want to build a foundation in a business, like kind of a la the E-Myth, where you're working more on the business rather than in the business. And if you left the business, it wouldn't fall apart. So it's like that balance between understanding what works best. And I think honestly, the ultimate thing that I feel like most, founders and startup founders especially should kind of be a little bit more clear about is like where and what and how they define success, where and ultimately how they're trying to take that path to get to where they want to be. Because a lot of times you're going to have that opportunity to build your personal brand. Typically not because, of course you can push it out and tickle the algorithms, mention Elon Musk a few times to make sure that you're ranking a little better and more people hear what you're saying. But at the same time, I think that nothing replaces excellence. So if you're really great at the thing that you do, if you create and build a great business, people are going to want to know exactly how you did it, what advice you might have, just all those things come about from there. So I always say at the end of the day, never skip excellence. But I do think that even as you get these businesses that are really great at what they do and they're really excellent, they're unicorns or whatever, and how we define that success, we're getting to a time where it's not just about buying the product or service. It's not just about going to this virtual place. It's about knowing a little bit more about what that individual stands for that started the business, what that CEO stands for. And I think that's one of the things that's constantly changing. So it's definitely not either or as much as it has been, I think, in the past. I think it's both and better to some degree. So as you start to be excellent at what it is that you do, whatever is your calling card, start to understand that people are going to want to know about who you are, what things, that you value, because they're going to make those decisions with their dollars and their support for better or sometimes not for better. And I think once you start to understand that, it's not understanding, should I do my personal brand or the business brand first? It's figuring out how you can integrate that together. And I feel like some of the best brands actually take march of the founders and the CEOs because they start to have those same kind of foundational principles, that culture, all that comes about from what I think the personal brand or the person behind or even the idea behind starts to say.
It goes back to your secret sauce point that you brought up. And I think a lot of folks excellence isn't good enough anymore. You do need that secret sauce. I mean, I'm sure there were a whole bunch of great electric car manufacturers, great, computer manufacturers, etc. What set folks like Apple and Tesla and IBM and these folks apart? I mean, obviously each of those are very different, and their trajectories are quite different. So excellent. I don't think excellence is good enough. I think excellence is the bare minimum now, because we're not just competing in the US market and so on. You're competing, yes. I mean, if you've seen some of these Chinese companies churning out amazing products and very modern, world-class things, the whole world's in trouble. We're not just competing in our own little market. So excellence, I think, is almost a hygiene factor. You need that. Talking about excellence, I want to talk about Blue 16 and CB Nation. So talk to me about when these companies started, and sort of, obviously Blue Media is your digital agency, and then CB Nation are your media assets. Maybe talk to me about when these started and your particular focus.
Yeah, I think I wish I was smart enough, I always say, to have the foresight to know that both of them can kind of be combined. But a lot of, both of these are a product of me believing strongly in how important media is. And I have like a broad definition on how I define media, but I say like we're all media companies. We're all in the media business, whether you're a solopreneur or you're a, 50,000 employee organization. Just understanding the power of media is really one of the most powerful things. So I started Blue 16. It'll be about 10 years ago, 11 years in July. I started that not necessarily, again, having the foresight. Really, I started that because I was doing a lot of freelance writing. I was writing, I think, planting those seeds of CB Nation before I knew what CB Nation was going to be. And I did a lot of freelance writing, always knew I wanted to start a business because I'd had those entrepreneurial tendencies when I was younger. But I always was a geek, for lack of a better term. So I always loved technology. I had built, computer when I was in high school. I'd worked on different websites as well too. I started like a nonprofit when I was in college. My mom has an embroidery business, so I worked on her website. So I did all those things, not necessarily because I said, "Oh, this is going to be a business." It was more like, "Okay, I know how to do that, so let me just start working on it." Fast forward a lot of years, I had an outside sales job, and you always have to, touch as many people as possible, cold calls, knocking on doors, everything you can do just to try to get some opportunities. So I would cold call people. And often the way that I would cold call people is I would talk often about their website. And I said, "Hey, this isn't set up right. Have you heard of this thing called SEO? You need to set up your title tag meta description," truly geeking out all over the phone just to hopefully get in the door to say, "Hey, do you want to buy advertising from me?" And I actually met somebody his name's Mike Moss. He was in a networking group, and he didn't buy advertising from me, but he did invest in me as a digital marketer. And while I had done like, odd jobs here and there before that, it was being in that networking meeting on a weekly basis that honestly just opened up that it was even an opportunity that I could pursue. I didn't see it as anything of value. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about secret sauces, superpowers, sometimes the things that you do easily and naturally, you may not even see them as value. Sometimes it takes other people saying, "I didn't even know you could do that." And we start to realize that, hey, this is like our USP or thing that sets us apart. So for me, that's what really kind of planted those seeds. And fast forward a lot of years, I started to like figure out, like, I was like, okay, I started to work on CB Nation. I was interviewing entrepreneurs and business owners, finding out and kind of leveling up just from learning from them, like why they're running their business, advice they have, just all these things. And I said, if I had like unlimited funds, I would invest in maybe like an entrepreneur magazine or something for the business, really develop value that I can create for the audience that we're trying to serve with our website support, SEO, and digital marketing services at the time. So I realized that I'd been working on and been interviewing people and been creating blog posts and all those things. So that's where those two kind of started to come together. And that's really where that media company mindset and mentality started to kind of take hold. So I've been working on the CB Nation part a lot longer. It wasn't, of course, called that. The first site was Herepreneur. So I would say, maybe 11 years. I'm going close to 11 years for the digital marketing business, maybe 12 or 13 in some form, shape, or fashion, depending on how you define it with CB Nation.
I often find that anyone who's been in media sales is very hardcore, because to sell any radio, television, newspaper, I mean, you've got to have a pit bull instinct, because nobody gives that money up very easily. So I've got great respect for folks who can do that. And I'm sure that's given you a lot of skills to, drive your own team in terms of sales, and also just that go-getter attitude for new business. Now, you've had, I'm sure, hundreds of interviews, on maybe thousands even, on CB Nation. You've spoken to a lot of successful people, and listening to successful people is one thing. So the whole point of podcast is obviously to impart knowledge and to hopefully inspire people to do something. Who's inspired you from a podcast that you've run to actually make some changes in your business? Because we need to practice what you preach, right?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, from doing the episodes is kind of what we talked about, is that balance being between being more of a personal brand, having more of your imprint on the business, and being able to kind of take a step back and realize that if from your business, you may not have a healthy business, and you may not even have a business that you can probably even argue. So I think a lot of the things that I really kind of take away from some of the founders is that they really get very quick as possible, I should say, to that product market fit, and understanding exactly like what they're doing to help make that impact, so that they can continue to kind of work on all the other aspects of business. So, hearing, and I think especially like I love kind of hearing those people and having people back on the show after they reach a certain kind of inflection point within their business. And, it can be like a year or 2 years later, but just seeing that growth and what that looks like is awesome. But I think one of the things that probably is like a subset of that is, I often say on the podcast, if you run your own race, you can't lose. And I think that could be sometimes the most difficult thing to kind of cope with, I guess you can say, is because we so often want to hear how people reach success, and we want to emulate and do exactly what they've done. And I think the reality is that when you start to realize, okay, this is my secret sauce, this is my superpower, this is where I want to go, this is what the goals and aspirations and dreams I have for myself, the business, combination of both, you start to put together your own kind of race, your own kind of flow, your own kind of secret sauce, your own kind of recipe ultimately that you're going to execute to kind of get there. So I think that's, I think it's really beautiful to kind of course, hear those stories and know you get to learn from other people. But I think ultimately the best knowledge that you can learn is probably knowledge of self. So really, taking time to continue to kind of develop yourself, learn more about what you're doing, it's probably going to be the biggest advantage, because you want to know, of course, what you want to do, but you probably want to know more than that, what you don't want to do. And I think that's some of the things that I've, heard about, from people that have been on the show.
So awesome. I've been geeking out on a lot of history podcasts at the moment, and you spoke about, if you step away from your business, will it collapse? And in most kingdoms, in most empires, as soon as the CEO or the king goes, that entire thing disappears. So I don't think, we should necessarily be looking for longevity in most businesses, because a lot of businesses, a lot of empires are driven or pulled along, kicking and screaming, by the force of personality of the owners. I think we can't underestimate the importance of that. So you've done over 10 years running your business. It's sort of this inflection point now where, Google was an overnight success in 10 years. Most companies are overnight successes in 10 years. What is success going to look like for you? Are you a family man? Do you just want to have enough money to buy a holiday house and relax a bit? Or are you going to be taking over in the States in terms of media? What is the plan, and how can we help you get there?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking that. And yeah, they say secret to overnight success takes 10 or 15 years. So you start to realize that once you start to get into the business, you start to realize it's not as easy as Instagram makes it
Nope.
seem, or at that. But
Follow
I
these
think
5 easy steps. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely an infomercial. So I get and understand that aspect. But I think for me, like, I really have always, going back to that story that I talked about being a 10-year-old, I think I'm definitely a busybody. So I don't think that I'm ever going to be the person that's on the yacht, even if I don't own the yacht and just like sipping pina coladas and doing that. I don't think that I have that makeup to do that. So I'm always going to be involved in something, but I think it's definitely going to be media related. So whether that's podcasting, blogging, vlogging, whatever that is or what that looks like. I think I see media as simply the transference of content into somebody else. So even us having the one-on-one conversation, I see that as media. When you're talking with somebody, you're talking about your business or you're talking about what you do. I see that as media. So I think I'm always going to be looking at that and seeing especially like how technology is influencing that and what might be some opportunities that go from there. But yeah, I'm definitely, a family person. So I'm a big believer that you don't have to choose either or. You can choose both and better. I look at it as being like in looking at things from an abundant mentality. So I know, of course, you have to make difficult decisions. But I think that as much as you can kind of not do work-life balance necessarily, but work-life integration is what I'm ultimately focusing on. So I'm always kind of challenging myself, like, how can I have both? And maybe that's the ambitious part of me always coming out. But I always feel like I can always create a better opportunity to do something better. And I think if you have that kind of entrepreneurial focus and that entrepreneurial mentality, that's what that's going to look like. But I see myself managing, different media properties, continue to kind of focus on the B2B world, but also branch out into other avenues and industries as well too. But I think, like you said, one of the kind of beautiful parts and maybe somewhat scary parts is that the world's getting a lot smaller and there's not these silos of location or even industries as well too. So we're starting to see like, I'm fascinated. I got my master's in sports industry management and I'm fascinated by the business part of sports, for example. So when I thought about sports, you just think about, okay, this is just sports here, but now you see these athletes that are starting businesses that are So all these things are starting to kind of conglomerate and come together. So I think that's one of the exciting things. And I think that's what'll keep me either young or old, depending on how you look at it.
There's one of the problems about being a jack of all trades is that there's so much exciting stuff out there. So, for example, I'm going to be running a series on Web 3.0 for two reasons. Number one, to get myself educated on that. And two, it's something that folks are interested in, and it's a growing industry. And it's quite funny. You mentioned the sports science. When I saw your headphones, it's like, I can imagine you saying, well, over to you, Don. You look like a sports presenter. So obviously you picked up some cues there. So yeah, I mean, what I try and do is I push people in terms of goals, because sometimes it's good having somebody behind you with a stick sometimes and saying, come on, let's focus your attention. Unfortunately, you speak about work-life balance. I think anyone who says you can have work-life balance and be super successful is a liar. It's like anything that looks easy is definitely not easy. So again, it's that difficult balance, family folks, that we need to balance. And I don't know if you've watched Succession, which is that fantastic series on HBO about a media conglomerate. I'd suggest you watch it. It's marvelous.
I gotta watch it.
And it's about the giant asshole of a dad, Logan Roy. And there's no work-life balance. Family does not come first. And unfortunately, I think especially in these industries, you've got to be a hard bastard to really get to the top of the food chain. So unless you're going to be a mean bastard and change some of your ways, it's going to take a little bit more time for you to take over in this industry. But I think, to your point, new industries being the first, maybe going into new sports like drone racing. I mean, that's the only way, smaller companies and folks like us can actually make an impact, is going into nascent industries where it hasn't been taken over or where the big guys don't see as much advantage yet. So I look forward to seeing where you grow into in that. And I'll be listening to a couple more of your podcasts on CB Nation. I listened to one this afternoon. So I'm excited to see where your business goes. And I see you've got some offerings as well for folks in terms of keynotes, in terms of your SEO and services like that. So where can folks get in touch with you, Gresh?
Yeah, absolutely. I truly appreciate that, Nicholas. And yeah, the best way to kind of find me is I have a kind of a landing page you can go to called iamgresh.com that has links to CB Nation, the podcast, the Blue 16, the digital marketing, and all the awesome things that I'm working on as well too. You can find everything there. And also you can check out one of the questions I have on the podcast is for CEO hacks, which are like apps, books, and habits that make people more effective and efficient. So if you want to check out some of those kind of quick and sometimes simple things that we don't realize can help us level up, then definitely you can check that out there too.
I'm sure that'd be an amazing resource. Well, Gresh, thanks so much for your time. And yeah, all the best in your endeavors, growing your media empire. And I look forward to chatting to you again.
Looking forward to it, Nicholas. Thank you.